So the right sector has now deleted the plea to Doku Umarov from its Facebook page and even says it never posted the message, but rather that its Facebook page was hacked and it was framed. But whether that's the truth or an attempt to save face and its relationship with Western backers, we can now discuss with World Affairs historian Professor Mark Armand from Oxford University. Professor Armand, very nice to see you. So I hope you heard our previous material. Yeah. And as it often happens, revolutionary, beautiful ideals and ideas often hijacked by the far right and radicals. And Russia wants Western nations to clarify if the people calling for help from a most wanted terrorist are the same people they helped steer into power. Do those right-wingers still enjoy wide foreign support?
Well, I think we've seen in the last 48 hours, suddenly the Western media and the Western governments that had been very enthusiastic about what they call people power, who had turned a blind eye to the paramilitary and neo-Nazi elements on the streets of Kiev, have begun to back away. The BBC's Gabriel Gatehouse, for instance, showed film of SS and Heil Hitler emblems on the right sector's equipment, which was obviously taken before the fall of Yanukovych. So it was available before the crisis, but it's only been shown since. And of course, whatever the right sector may say, we remember in Lvov there are streets named in honour not only of Nazi collaborators like Stefan Bandera, but also of Chechen anti-Russian fighters. So this particular claim that the right sector had put onto its Facebook page an appeal to Umarov is not impossible at all. It would fit their past picture. Of course, as I say, now the Western sponsors are rather worried. Suddenly we begin to see criticism of the new regime in Kiev's abolition of Russian language rights, of its rescinding of the ban on neo-Nazi symbols, and so on. Suddenly the West begins to say, perhaps we've unleashed a force here that is, in fact, highly destabilizing, because clearly if you live in Ukraine, where so many atrocities were committed only 70 years ago by Hitler, the idea that there should be any sympathy, either locally or in the West, after all, particularly in Poland, is quite bizarre.
Do you think the right sector group, which later denied appealing to Umarov, saying their website was hacked, is now in damage control mode?
Well, I think they are, partly because, as I say, suddenly the whole mood music from Washington, from London, from Brussels, even from Warsaw, is to say, reach out to the Russian population, reach out to the Jewish population that is fearful of this radical neo-Nazi type of rhetoric and stormtrooper squads roaming the streets of some of the cities of Ukraine. They've realized, in fact, that the coup that overthrew Yanukovych has in fact not been the end of the drama, but only the first act. And of course, it's a sign, I think, of a rather childish, almost unbelievably incompetent attitude on the part of the NATO countries, that they facilitated this crisis without thinking through what would happen, that you are unleashing forces of nationalism, of fear, that can become uncontrollable. Don't we remember what happened in Yugoslavia? Except, of course, that many of the leading figures in the Obama administration, like Susan Power, Susan Rice and so on, his key advisors on international relations, actually think that smashing places up is a good thing. They support, for instance, the breakup of Yugoslavia to create Kosovo, the breakup of Sudan to create South Sudan. Suddenly, however, when they're confronted by Russian speakers and others who say, we don't particularly want to live in a country that has this kind of regime, they start talking about international law is sacrosanct, sovereignty cannot be challenged. They become parodies of what they used to criticize. And I think the inconsistency of NATO policy, particularly from Washington, London and Brussels,
Professor,
is something that shows that they've lost the plot.
Yeah, and also almost 700,000 Ukrainians have fled to Russia in the past 2 months, and they're continuing to go, which some see as an indicator of a looming humanitarian disaster. Should Ukraine brace for the worst?
I think it should, because on the one hand, as you say, there's a fear on the part of Russian speakers and people who don't like the new regime, who may be ethnic Ukrainians and so on, that causes them to move east. But also the economic collapse of Ukraine, which is, of course, made much worse by the political chaos and the violence, which implodes the currency, implodes the capacity of the Ukraine to meet its obligations, is pushing people to the west. There's an outflow of people also leaving Western Ukraine. So we're actually seeing a country that the very existence of which is being challenged by the nationalists. The Ukrainian nationalists claim they want to protect their state, but actually their absurd, arrogant behaviour is imploding it. And so in a sense, we now face a situation where Russia may be picking up the pieces in the south, but the West will have to pick up the much bigger and more expensive piece in the centre. And of course, ironically, NATO wanted Crimea, not the Ukraine itself.
Mark Arman, Professor of History at Oxford University, many thanks indeed.